Okay guys, we're here to talk about the long bolt method, which is far superior to the San Diego method of changing the shocks. The long bolt is basically the long bolt that goes through the upper control arm. You see right here, there's a nut on the back of the long bolt, and here is the front of the long bolt in question, and the bolt's going to come out this way, and I'll show you that in just a second. Now before you get too far along in this, you want to break all these bolts loose, all the nuts and all the hardware. The nut on the back of the long bolt that we're removing, you want to break that loose. You'll want to undo your sway bar and link at the top or the bottom. I did the bottom on this one. And you want to lose the nut and bolt on the bottom shock, which is right down here, the bottom of the shock mount. Those are the points that you need to get loose in order to do this long bolt method. Okay, we've got a couple of things going on here. First, I have lifted up the control arm just slightly with the jack. The jack is now supporting the weight underneath the control arm. I've got the bolts loose on the top bolt, the long bolt, and it is loose. Now, you might be thinking this thing doesn't move real well, but it's not bound in there at all. In fact, it comes out just that easy. You'll see it sliding through the front up towards the radiator, and it is just about loose. Okay, so here you see the long bolt. It's been completely removed. I just leave it sitting here in the sway bar bracket there, just sort of sitting right there, and that's where it can stay. There's a really large washer on either end that pinches the bushings between all of this. There's one there, and then there's one in my little bucket of nuts and bolts I've taken off. So one of them goes right there on reassembly, and the other one right against this bushing. Okay, now we're up inside the engine bay, and we see the top hat that everyone's pretty accustomed to. You would undo this bolt and this bolt here if you were going to remove the shock as an entire assembly. But doing that gives you the spring all preloaded, and it's very dangerous to take that apart at that point. And people talk about spring compressors, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So we are going to put a little wrench on the flat spot of this stud right here and undo this nut slowly. We're not going to undo it all the way quite yet until we double check to make sure that the jack below is supporting the lower control arm. So I'm going to get this loose and ready to go. These are going to stay in place because the whole top assembly is going to stay there, and the dampener and the springs are going to go out the bottom. Okay, we've got the jack underneath the control arm, and I've got just a little bit of pressure on it, so it's just pushing up on the spring assembly in the lower control arm. I've got a nifty ratcheting box wrench here, and we're going to loosen this nut at the top that is holding the spring and the dampener together with the assembly. Now, if that jack wasn't there, this would be about ready to pop loose dangerously, and this is what causes so much terror and tells people to go and spend hundreds of dollars to have a mechanic use a spring compressor, or go buy the suicide sticks at Harbor Freight, and it's just not a good idea. Okay, we have this top is now done, and we can take the nut off, and this washer and the pillow here, and see that we just have the dampener coming up through that hole. I'm going to hold on to these separately so we don't lose them when the dampener comes out the bottom. Now here is the magic that happens when we aren't going to worry about spring compressors. I am going to slowly lower the jack down, just a little bit at a time. You can see the Riceland coilovers are sprung up pretty close to the top. If you want to be even more safe, you could lower those down. And it's now lowering real slow on the jack. It's like when you're letting the car down off of the jack stands. The suspension is continuing to droop. And there you go. The control arm is sagged and those springs are completely unsprung. It's now safe to remove that dampener assembly. Okay, now with the suspension at full droop, you can start to work the shock assembly out. It's out of this bottom mount. Sometimes you need to give a little bit of a wiggle with a screwdriver to get it broken loose, but I trust everybody's smart enough to do that now that we've dispelled the mystery of the spring compressor. And here is the Riceland coilover. You can see the coil comes apart. I've got the dampener pushed all the way down just to help get it out from the assembly there. And one thing I did forget to mention earlier, the ABS, assuming you have an ABS car, has the sensor right there on a 12mm nut. So just want to get that guy off of there before you start tugging on it. Okay, the cool thing about the long bolt method is there's no long bolt in the back. So you just take the 17mm nut out right here, or the 17mm bolt out rather, and the lower shock is loose. And just you'll see that that's loose right there. And what we're going to do is we're going to jack up under this control arm again, just like we did at the front, to pin this in, hold it. We're going to undo the nut at the top of the dampener from inside the trunk, and then we'll lower the control arm down with the jack slowly until this whole spring assembly comes unsprung, and the whole assembly will just come right back out without the use of spring compressors. Okay, we've got the top nut undone. The jack is supporting the lower control arm and the whole assembly. See the tender springs there are somewhat compressed, and I'm going to just lower the jack real slowly here. You can watch the springs unload. I've got the rear sway bar disconnected there, so that will not affect the wishbones uncompressing. You see the top of the dampener is out of the assembly now, and the spring is unsprung. And there it is, all loose. Okay, we're ready to reinstall. We've got the new dampener in place. Bolt is just hand tightened right there. The stack is in place with the tender springs. Notice the adjustment. There's a lot of adjustment left. It's you don't have to crank it down. And this is the top of the dampener right up here, just off camera. There's plenty of room. So we've got our jack underneath the control arm, and I'm going to just jack the jack up until the dampener goes up and into the hole. Make sure we get the top here set into the top hat, and then I'll thread it in from the top. Okay, we got this just right up there inside the hole. I'm just going to increase the pressure on the jack. We'll do a little bit of preload there. The tender springs compressing, and you see that piston top of the shock going up into the hole. And we'll grab the nut and other hardware that go on the top. Inside the trunk, you see we've got the top of the shock there. That goes down there and here, and just thread that on. There's some specifications on how tight to tighten that, and then the adjuster and everything else will go back on, but that is the basic assembly. Okay, we're back to work on the fronts. Got the bolt in the lower control arm right here, and got the shock assembly basically put together here. It's ready to go up to the top hat. So I'm going to slowly jack this up with the floor jack, and so you get that all the way up there until it is set. See the tender springs start to load up, and feel the shock body clicking around in the top hat, and you want to get that right up there where it's just got a little bit of pressure on it, and we'll tighten from the top.